I used to think of 7-Eleven as one of the safest constants in life. No matter the weather, no matter the hour, that glowing neon sign was always there. For me, it wasn't just a convenience store. It was ritual. My name's Darren, and for years, the Burnside 7-Eleven in Portland was like a second home. Every morning before work, I'd stop in for an iced coffee and a scratch-off ticket. Martin, the clerk who practically ran the place, always had a smile ready. He'd ask about the latest graphic novels, tell me if a new release had buzz, or slip me an extra donut when the day-old tray filled up. Martin wasn't just a cashier, he was a community man. He sponsored the local youth baseball league, donated snacks to the shelter, and showed up at volunteer shifts like clockwork. You couldn't walk 3 blocks without someone saying his name. People trusted him. I trusted him. That's why October of 2016 still sticks with me. One night, the store lights were off early, a crooked handwritten sign taped to the glass. Closed, family, emergency. I didn't think much of it. Everyone has bad nights. But when the store stayed dark the next morning, my gut twisted. This was 7-Eleven. These places didn't close for anything short of disaster. I pulled out my phone, tried calling the landline. No answer. By lunch, I was texting Cassandra, another regular who worked across the street. She hadn't seen him either. The gossip mill started rolling quick, people whispering about his absence from the youth center shift. By the time I ran into Kyle at another corner store that afternoon, the whispers weren't whispers anymore. He leaned in, his voice low and urgent. "You didn't hear? Martin got arrested last night." At first, I laughed. Arrested? Martin? The guy who handed out free coffee and sponsored Little League? Maybe a DUI, I thought. Portland police pulling over the wrong man at the wrong time. But Kyle shook his head, eyes darting like he didn't even want to say it. "No, Darren. Murder. 17 years ago. Arizona." The words barely made sense in my head. Murder? Martin? I stood there gripping an energy drink, my hand shaking so bad I nearly dropped it. The story unraveled fast. Turns out Martin used to own a small corner store in Arizona with his wife, Lydia. Everyone knew the broad strokes. She died during a robbery gone wrong. He lost everything and moved up north to start fresh. The version we all knew painted him as a widower trying to rebuild. Nobody pressed him for details because grief was a heavy thing, and he carried it like a badge. But according to Kyle, investigators had always been suspicious. The robbery scene looked staged, and insurance money changed hands not long after. Martin went to trial back then, but with lack of evidence, he walked. Still, new technology doesn't forget. DNA, re-examined evidence, it all caught up to him. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying our conversations in my head. Him laughing at my Batman obsession, handing out extra coffee, talking about donating snacks. Was it real kindness or just camouflage? The next morning, Cassandra texted me. "They're saying he did it for money, didn't want to split the store with his wife." I didn't know what to believe. I walked past the shuttered 7-Eleven, the neon sign buzzing faintly in daylight. For the first time in years, it wasn't a place of comfort. It was a crime scene, and I'd been blind to it all along. A week later, the papers had the whole neighborhood buzzing. Local clerk tied to cold case murder splashed across headlines, Martin's mugshot plastered online like he was some stranger. But to us, he wasn't a stranger. He was the guy who slipped extra napkins into your bag, the guy who remembered if you liked your coffee with cream or not. Seeing him in handcuffs felt like the world had tilted sideways. I met up with Cassandra outside her office. She was shaking her head, scrolling through her phone. "Listen to this," she said, showing me an article. "They're saying the robbery was staged, the place was trashed, but nothing really stolen. And the insurance payout? Huge. He used it to start over." I felt sick. All those mornings chatting over cheap coffee, were they built on blood money? Later, at the pub down the street, a group of us regulars gathered. Kyle was there, still rattled. A couple of the youth coaches showed up too, their voices low, full of anger. I just can't wrap my head around it, one of them muttered. The man donated every season, showed up for every fundraiser. Evil hides in plain sight, another said. When it was my turn to speak, I admitted the truth. I never questioned his story. I didn't want to. We all liked the idea of Martin as the good guy, the community man. Maybe that made it easier for him to hide. Nobody had a reply. We all stared at our drinks, the chatter of the bar around us sounding miles away. That night, walking home past the shuttered store, I felt the weight of it. Every light inside was off, but I could still hear the hum of the Slurpee machine in my memory. Ordinary sounds that no longer felt ordinary at all. The trial moved faster than I expected. 17 years of suspicion boiled down to weeks in court. I followed every update like it was a morbid duty. DNA testing tied him directly to the so-called robbery scene. The prosecution painted him as a man who valued money and control over life itself. Divorce would have cost him half the business. Murder cost him nothing but his conscience. I still remember Cassandra calling me after the verdict. Her voice was quiet. They convicted him. First degree. Life sentence. I sat there in my apartment staring at my comic books stacked on the shelf, feeling a hollowness I couldn't name. It wasn't just Martin going to prison. It was the shattering of a safe little corner of my life. A week later, the 7-Eleven reopened under new management. A younger guy named Travis took over, and he tried hard to bring normalcy back. Free coffee mornings, clean counters, even a community bulletin board. But the spirit was gone. Customers walked in, looked around, and whispered like the walls still carried Martin's shadow. One evening I stopped by. Travis handed me my usual iced coffee, smiling like he wanted me to feel comfortable again. But when I left, I couldn't shake it. The place felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by betrayal. Walking home, Kyle caught up with me. "You ever think about how close we were?" he asked. "How many hours we spent laughing with him, never knowing?" I nodded. "Yeah. Makes you wonder how well we really know anyone." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. We both knew the truth now. Sometimes the monsters don't lurk in the dark. Sometimes they stand behind the counter handing you change with a smile. Years have passed, but I still feel it when I pass that store. The neon sign flickers, the Slurpee machine hums, and all I can think about is Martin's grin, his easy small talk, the way he fooled us all. Some people still argue about it, saying maybe the system got it wrong. But the evidence was clear enough. He'd built a life on a lie, one coffee at a time. Sometimes I walk in for old time's sake. Travis runs the place well enough, and the shelves are always stocked. But the air feels heavier. Maybe it's just me. Maybe once you've seen kindness twisted into a mask, you stop trusting it the same way. I think about Lydia, his wife, more than I ever thought about Martin. She wasn't just a name in a file. She was a person, a partner, a woman whose life was stolen. Her story was buried under Martin's charm until the truth clawed its way out. One night I ran into Cassandra outside the store. She held her coffee close, watching the glow of the sign. "Funny, isn't it?" she said. "How a place can look the same, but never feel the same." I nodded. "Yeah, it's like the ground shifted under us and we're still standing in the cracks." We stood in silence for a while, the hum of the city around us, both knowing some scars don't fade. And even now, when I walk past late at night, I still wonder, how many Martins are out there? How many smiles hide secrets we'll never see until it's too late? Evil doesn't always wear a mask of menace. Sometimes it smiles, sponsors a baseball team, and hands out free coffee. We can't live our lives distrusting every kindness, but we should remember that people are layered. What looks ordinary can hide the unthinkable. The lesson isn't paranoia, it's awareness. Never assume you truly know someone based on surface gestures alone, because trust, once broken, reminds us how fragile our sense of safety really is. I was 23 the year it happened, living in a cramped studio apartment on the north side of Seattle. Rent wasn't cheap, and after dropping out of community college, I bounced between part-time jobs before landing at a 7-Eleven on Aurora Avenue North. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady money. The place smelled like burnt coffee and mop water no matter how many times you cleaned, and the fluorescent lights hummed like bees overhead. Nights were the hardest shifts. People came in strung out, drunk, sometimes angry. But I got used to it. By the fall of 2021, I could run the register, restock shelves, and keep an eye on the late-night crowd without thinking twice. That Thursday in November started like any other closing shift. It was raining, which meant fewer customers, and I welcomed the quiet. By 10 o'clock, the store was empty. I leaned against the counter, thumbing through a puzzle game on my phone, trying to ignore the tired ache in my legs. That was when I heard the first crash. A sharp sound, like a box tumbling onto the floor. My head jerked up, and I scanned the aisles. Nothing moved. My first thought was that some bag of chips or an energy drink had slipped. The shelves were always overstuffed. Still, my pulse quickened. I told myself not to be paranoid. I stepped out from behind the counter, my sneakers squeaking faintly on the tile, and glanced down the rows. All I saw were neat stacks of snacks, cans lined in perfect rows, candy glistening under the harsh lights. No customers, no movement. Just me. I shrugged, muttered under my breath, and went back to the register. But the silence felt heavier than before, like the building itself was waiting for something. By 10:20, the store was still dead quiet. I checked the clock above the cigarette case, then the dark windows streaked with rain. A dull thud came from the candy aisle. My throat went dry. I grabbed the flashlight we kept behind the counter and started forward. My shoes scuffed against the floor louder than I wanted them to, like I was announcing myself. When I reached the aisle, 2 cans of energy drink lay on the ground. The shelf above them was steady, not bent or loose. I crouched, picked them up, and slid them back into place. My nerves buzzed like static. The air felt wrong, as if someone had been standing there seconds earlier. I called out, "Hello? Store's closed." My voice cracked, sounding more afraid than firm. No answer, just the hum of refrigerators along the back wall. I turned quickly, sweeping the flashlight beam over the rows of snacks, frozen dinners, and soda bottles. Everything looked normal. Still, the prickling on the back of my neck wouldn't leave. I forced myself to walk back to the counter, scanning over my shoulder with each step. Minutes later, another crash echoed, this time from the freezer section at the far end. Louder, deliberate. My chest tightened. I gripped my phone in one hand, flashlight in the other, and forced my legs to move. Each step sounded like it belonged in someone else's body. When I reached the aisle, I found another item on the floor, but no one around. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not walking, not casual. Running. Sprinting toward the counter. The sound ripped through the silence like thunder, and my stomach dropped. I bolted back toward the front. As I rounded the corner, I froze. A man was hunched over the register, clawing at the locked drawer. His hood was pulled low, his clothes soaked from the rain. I shouted, "Hey, stop!" My voice came out high, panicked. He didn't even flinch. He rattled the drawer again, then shifted to the second register, jerking at it like a madman. I fumbled with my phone, fingers shaking so badly I could barely unlock it. "I'm calling the cops," I yelled. My hand was sweaty against the screen. The man spun around suddenly. For one terrifying second, I thought he would come at me. His face was hidden, but I saw his chest heaving under his jacket. He hesitated, then bolted. He shoved the glass doors open so hard they slammed against the frame and stormed out into the rain. I lunged forward, slammed the lock into place, and staggered back, heart hammering in my throat. I dialed 911, my voice trembling. There was someone in my store. He tried to break into the registers. He ran out the front. The operator kept me calm, told me officers were on the way. I stood there gripping the counter like it might hold me up. My reflection in the glass looked pale, hollow. Every shadow beyond the window felt like him, waiting to rush back inside. Police arrived within minutes, lights flashing red and blue against the wet pavement. 2 officers stepped inside, radios crackling. One walked the aisles with a flashlight while the other asked me questions. "Did you see him come in?" I shook my head. "No. He must have slipped in before closing. I swear the last customer left around 10:15. I didn't see anyone else." The officer nodded. "That happens sometimes. They hide, wait for the place to empty out." The words made my stomach twist. I thought of all the times I'd worked late, wandering aisles alone. The idea that someone could have been crouched behind a shelf waiting made me shiver. The officers confirmed nothing was taken, though the registers bore fresh scratches. One of them told me they'd check the cameras, but it was unlikely they'd catch him unless he hit another store. I nodded numbly, hugging myself as the adrenaline drained away. When they left, the silence rushed back in. I still had to finish closing. My hands shook as I counted cash, checked doors, turned off lights. Every step echoed too loud. Every shadow seemed to twitch. I double-checked the bathroom, the storage room, even the mop closet before finally locking up. Driving home through the rain, I couldn't shake the thought. What if he hadn't gone for the register? What if he had waited for me instead? For weeks, I couldn't close without paranoia crawling under my skin. Every thud from the refrigerators, every flicker of the lights felt like a warning. My manager told me to relax, said it was just a break-in attempt, nothing new in this part of town. But he didn't understand what it was like to feel hunted inside a place you thought you knew. Customers came and went oblivious. I'd force a smile, scan their items, and send them on their way, but my eyes darted constantly toward the aisles, searching for movement. When the doors chimed, my chest seized until I saw who it was. One night I caught myself gripping the flashlight so tight my hand ached. Another night, I almost screamed when a soda can rolled off the shelf by itself. The fear lived in me, twisting my gut, reminding me of that hooded figure's silent patience. I stayed at the job for a few more months, but eventually I quit. I told myself it was for better hours, but the truth was simpler. I couldn't shake the memory. The store wasn't just a place of work anymore. It was a hunting ground. Even now, years later, when I walk into a convenience store late at night, I still glance at the aisles, still listen for footsteps, still wonder if someone is waiting. Sometimes the greatest dangers come not from loud threats, but from the quiet patience of those who hide in plain sight. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And never assume that familiar places are truly safe. When people ask me what I do for a living, I usually say, retail. It's easier than explaining the truth. I manage a 7-Eleven in Miami, not the quiet kind tucked into a suburb where the biggest crisis is a Slurpee machine breaking down. Mine sits on Coral Way, across from a bus terminal where humanity and whatever else crawls out at night all seem to collide. My name's Ethan, and the store used to belong to my grandfather. He ran it for 40 years before age caught up with him, and I was drafted into keeping the place afloat. I dropped out of college, thought I'd be doing something different with my life, maybe drawing comics or hustling graphic designs. Instead, I ring up beer at 2 a.m., and sweep aisles sticky with God knows what. Over time, though, I noticed my grandfather's customers weren't the typical drunks and night owls you'd expect. They were something stranger. Folks whispered about them in the neighborhood, but I saw them up close. The wolf pack that came in smelling like damp forest. An older woman swaddled in layers even when the heat burned. Men in suits who never seemed to blink. My grandfather never explained, just carried on like they were ordinary customers. The first morning that sticks in my mind was July 2019. The humidity pressed down like a wet blanket. I was dragging myself behind the counter, half awake, when Mrs. Callahan shuffled in. Old, gray, voice sharp enough to cut glass. People swore she was a banshee. She gave me a nod, asked where the licorice bones were stocked. I pointed without even lifting my head from the inventory screen. She chuckled and said, "Your indifference is a blessing." That's how my day began, and I had no idea how much heavier it would get. By 9, the next regular walked in. A tall man in a sharp black suit, hair slicked back, skin pale enough to catch the light. He opened the cooler, pulled out a pack of crimson-tinted energy essences, studied me with a faint smile like he was measuring my pulse. I raised a lazy thumbs up. He smirked and glided toward the candy aisle. I'd stopped questioning why the cooler carried bottles nobody in distribution ever accounted for. My grandfather handled those shipments personally, always muttering about special stock. Then came the noise. The bell above the door clanged and 3 big guys stormed in. Heavy boots, loud voices, shoulders too wide for the aisles. Greg led the way, the so-called alpha of the local wolf pack. He slammed a half-empty shampoo bottle on the counter so hard I thought the glass might crack. "This isn't what we use," he snarled. "Where's the brand that actually keeps our fur clean?" I rubbed my eyes, already exhausted. "That's the replacement. Formulas are nearly identical. Unless you enjoy smelling like wet dog, I'd suggest adjusting." The sarcasm rolled off my tongue before I could stop it. His boys growled low, the sound rumbling through the store. Greg's eyes burned into me. "You don't get to talk to me like that, my grandfather would..." And that's when the back door creaked open. My grandfather shuffled out, cardigan buttoned wrong, slippers dragging. His voice carried like steel scraping the floor. "Enough." Every growl stopped. Even Greg swallowed hard. My grandfather turned first to me. "Why did you change the stock?" "Too expensive," I muttered. "Supply costs went up." Then he turned to Greg. "You want your shampoo? Fine, I'll special order it, but you pay up front, cash only." The wolves lowered their heads and left without another word. After they were gone, the air in the store stayed heavy, like the growls had sunk into the walls. I leaned against the counter, trying to steady myself. My grandfather sat down beside the lotto display, hands trembling just enough that I noticed. "You can't treat them like ordinary customers," he said quietly. "I thought that's what we did," I shot back. "Sell them snacks, ring up their shampoo, pretend it's normal." He looked at me for a long time, his eyes tired but sharp. "It's normal because we make it normal. This store is more than shelves and Slurpees. It's a line between worlds. You start mocking them, you'll break that balance." I wanted to laugh, but something about his tone froze the joke in my throat. Balance. That word clung to me. By lunchtime, the banshee had paid for her licorice bones, the suited man his bottles, and a new face, a weary traveler with eyes like fog, picked up a jar labeled ethereal preserves. I didn't ask questions, I just rang him up and bagged it like it was peanut butter. When the rush calmed, I stepped outside for air. The bus terminal across the street buzzed with human noise, oblivious. I lit a cigarette and stared back at the neon sign humming above the door. Inside, my grandfather muttered to himself as he counted bills. Kids these days don't know how dangerous balance really is. I pretended not to hear, but deep down I knew those words weren't just the ramblings of an old man. They were a warning. That night I stayed late, sweeping the aisles after midnight. The cooler hummed in that strange, uneven way, like a machine patched together from spare parts no manufacturer would claim. Every sweep of my broom pulled up clumps of coarse fur, thick enough to clog the dustpan. Around 1 a.m., Greg returned alone. He stood by the counter, shoulders slumped, voice low. "Sorry about earlier, my boys get riled up." I froze, broom in hand. It wasn't often a wolf apologized. "Look," he said, "your grandfather keeps this place neutral. We respect that. Don't mess it up with sarcasm." His eyes narrowed, almost pleading. "You don't know how thin the line is." I swallowed hard. "Fine. But maybe don't threaten me in my own store." He gave a grim smile. "Fair enough." Then he walked out into the humid night, leaving the doorbell to echo behind him. When I told my grandfather, he didn't look surprised. He just nodded. "You see now? They come here because it's safe, because we don't treat them like freaks or monsters. We keep the peace one sale at a time." I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the weight in Greg's expression, the resignation in my grandfather's voice. This wasn't just a store. It was a truce, fragile and breakable. And somehow I was part of it. Weeks turned into months and I learned to read the rhythms of the store. The banshee always bought licorice before a storm. The suited man stocked up on vials during full moons. Greg's pack bought shampoo on Thursdays, never Fridays. Patterns stitched into routine, fragile but steady. I started noticing details I'd ignored before. The way the fluorescent lights flickered when certain customers entered. The way the credit card reader sometimes refused swipes from hands that didn't quite look human. The way my grandfather's face tightened every time balance wavered. One evening, as we closed up, I asked him, "Why us? Why this store?" He leaned on the counter, eyes distant. "Because somebody has to hold the line, not with weapons or threats, with patience, with business as usual. That's the trick. If they can shop here like anyone else, they remember they can live among anyone else." I didn't respond. But when I locked the door and saw the reflection of that glowing 7-Eleven sign in the glass, I felt it. This wasn't my dream job. It wasn't even the life I wanted. But it was the life I'd inherited. And it mattered more than I'd realized. Now, whenever the wolves grumble or the banshee croaks, I just ring them up, bag their items and say, "Have a good night." Because sometimes that's all it takes to keep peace alive. Peace doesn't always come from grand gestures or heroic acts. Sometimes it's in the ordinary, selling coffee, scanning items, holding your tongue when anger boils. Respect, even when it feels undeserved, can be the thread keeping chaos from spilling over. My grandfather taught me the balance wasn't magic. It was everyday kindness disguised as routine, and that might be the most powerful kind of truce there is. I used to believe my family was ordinary, that our biggest conflicts were the same small battles everyone else fought. But living under the same roof with my mother and my husband taught me how easily tension can seep into the cracks of a home and rot everything inside. My mother, Linda, moved in with us after my father died. She was 63, stubborn and proud, but she had a soft spot for my daughter, Sophie. My husband, Richard, couldn't be more different. He was rigid, controlling, quick to criticize. He always had something to say about the way Sophie dressed or how her hair looked, and he rarely missed a chance to remind her she wasn't good enough. I learned to live between them like a rope in a tug-of-war. I tried to shield Sophie from Richard's sharp words, but after years of listening to him, she had grown timid and withdrawn. She clutched her spelling cards as if the whole world depended on each word spelled right. That morning in April 2012, I tried to focus on her big day, the district spelling bee, but Richard's voice carried through the kitchen like thunder. "Her dress looks sloppy," he barked, glaring at me. "She looks fine," I said, trying to keep calm. "She looks a mess. You should be embarrassed." Before I could speak, my mother stepped in. "Leave the child alone," she snapped, her voice like steel. "Marianne, take Sophie and go. Don't let him ruin today." Her words startled me. My mother rarely stood up to Richard so directly. I grabbed Sophie's hand and led her out the door. She looked up at me, eyes wide. "Is Grandma mad?" she whispered. I shook my head, though deep down I wasn't sure. The spelling bee was uneventful, but Sophie was relieved when it was over. She spelled out 2 words correctly, then faltered on the third. I told her I was proud anyway. I wanted her to believe it, even if Richard never would. When I dropped her at school afterward, she seemed lighter, free of his gaze for a while. I thought the day was nearly over, but my mother insisted otherwise. "Come with me," she said, her voice firm. "Let's go celebrate. It's my birthday after all." She led me to the 7-Eleven on Lorraine Avenue, a store she loved for reasons I never understood. It had a tiny cafe corner with weak cappuccinos and powdered donuts, yet she acted like it was a 5-star restaurant. That day she went overboard, ordering 3 cappuccinos, frosted donuts, and 2 sandwiches. She laughed loudly, clinking her cup against mine as though we were celebrating something monumental. She even pulled out her phone, taking pictures of the pastries, of us, of her smiling with her teeth showing. I tried to play along, but unease crawled over me. "Mom, what's gotten into you?" I asked. "It's my birthday, why shouldn't I be happy?" she said. Her giddiness felt unnatural, almost forced. She spoke quickly, her hands trembling slightly as she poured sugar into her cup. I sipped my cappuccino and wondered if I had missed something, some diagnosis, some hidden struggle, but she waved off every question. Around noon, as we stepped into the damp parking lot, a police cruiser screeched in front of us. 2 officers jumped out, their faces hard. My stomach knotted. "Are you Marianne Collins?" one asked. "Yes," I said, my voice unsteady. "We need you both to come with us immediately." I turned to my mother, expecting confusion. Instead, her expression barely shifted, as if she had been waiting for this. At the station, they split us up. They placed me in a narrow hallway while they took my mother into a small interrogation room. I sat there trembling, clutching my purse against my chest, trying to make sense of what was happening. Soon, Richard's parents and sister arrived, their eyes red and swollen. The silence between us was heavy. No one would meet my gaze. Through the thin walls, I heard fragments of voices. Words floated out like ghosts. Multiple gunshots. Body found in living room. Weapon recovered. Each phrase stabbed me, but I told myself I had misheard. Then I heard her voice, my mother's voice, calm, almost cheerful. "I did it," she said. "Best birthday gift I could give." The air left my lungs. My legs went numb. I pressed my hand to the cold wall, hoping I'd wake from a nightmare. When the door opened, my mother stepped out. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't read, half pride, half relief. She leaned close and whispered, "You're free now." I collapsed into the chair, shaking my head. "What did you do?" I asked, but my voice barely carried. She didn't answer. Officers led her away, her steps steady, her chin high. The days after blurred into one long ache. Richard was gone, killed in our living room. Neighbors whispered on their porches, their words dripping with judgment. Some said my mother had hated him for years, that she'd finally snapped. Others claimed she was protecting Sophie, protecting me. Sophie didn't understand. She came home from school early that day, her eyes darting around, asking where her father was. I told her the truth in fragments, careful not to drown her in details, but children always sense more than we think. She cried quietly, pressing herself against me, asking if Grandma was bad. At night, I lay awake, replaying every moment. The way my mother had laughed at the cafe, the way she'd looked at me afterward, satisfied. I wondered if she had planned it for weeks or if it was a sudden storm inside her. Either way, the damage was permanent. Therapy became routine for Sophie. She drew pictures of birthday cakes with knives stuck in them. She whispered that birthdays scared her now. I held her and cried silently, knowing no amount of love could erase what she had seen or felt. I visited my mother once in jail. She smiled when she saw me, her hands folded neatly on the table. "I gave you your life back," she said. I couldn't speak. I walked out before the time was up, leaving her sitting there with that same twisted smile. 10 years have passed, yet the memory still follows me like a shadow. Every time I drive past that 7-Eleven, I see her laughing with frosted sugar on her lips, celebrating a murder she hadn't yet confessed. The cafe corner, once ordinary, became the place where my life split in two. I've tried to rebuild. Sophie is older now, cautious but stronger. She doesn't like to talk about her father or her grandmother, but I see the way her eyes darken on birthdays. I try to make them bright for her, cakes and gifts and laughter, but a part of her is always waiting for something terrible to happen. As for me, I still don't know if my mother acted out of love or hatred. Maybe both. Maybe she thought she was saving us, but in the process, she destroyed the very foundation we stood on. I've learned that protection twisted into violence doesn't set anyone free. It only trades one prison for another. When I walk into convenience stores now, I sometimes pause by the pastry counter, remembering her joy that morning. I wonder if she knew what she was about to do, or if she simply decided it was the only way. Either way, it left me with a wound that doesn't heal. Love cannot excuse violence, and protection built on blood only creates deeper scars. True freedom comes from courage to leave, not from vengeance carried out in our name. I never pictured myself working nights at a 7-Eleven off I-25 in Albuquerque. At 19, I had vague ideas about college, maybe transferring my part-time barista skills into something bigger, but life didn't move that way. Rent had to be paid, and the only job I could snag was the graveyard shift at a convenience store that smelled like burnt coffee and mop water. Most nights weren't bad. The regulars were truckers heading north, insomniacs grabbing snacks, or college kids too wired to sleep. October 2018 was my first month working alone. My manager had promised it was temporary, just until the new hire finished training, but that Tuesday night stretched forever. The desert air had cooled, the parking lot was empty, and inside the buzzing fluorescents hummed loud enough to make me feel like the building itself was alive. I'd brewed a fresh pot of coffee at midnight when I heard it. The low rumble of an SUV pulling into the drive-through lane. Dark. Windows tinted so black I couldn't see shapes inside. Normally, customers ordered fast, grabbed their stuff, and left. This one didn't. I slipped on the headset, tried to sound cheery. "Welcome to 7-Eleven. Can I help you tonight?" Silence. Then a voice, low and raspy, cracked through static. "One tall caramel, bloodbath." I froze. You mean caramel macchiato?" I said, laughing nervously. Nothing came back except steady, heavy breathing. Minutes passed. The SUV idled, exhaust curling into the night. 5 minutes. 10. I checked the monitors, my chest tightening. Whoever was inside wasn't leaving. By 12:30, my nerves felt like frayed wires. I told myself it was some drunk pulling a prank, but curiosity pulled me toward the door. That's when everything began to unravel. Stepping outside, the night hit me hard. Cool desert air pressed against my skin, and the only sounds were the hum of the freeway and the faint whine of the SUV's engine. My sneakers scraped against the asphalt as I walked toward the driver's side, trying to convince myself I wasn't about to do something stupid. The closer I got, the worse it felt. My stomach twisted when I noticed the back windows. Smears, bloody handprints, dozens of them, pressed against the glass. They weren't the marks of someone calm. They were frantic, clawing, desperate. My throat went dry. I whispered, "Oh God," and stepped back. Before I could turn, the rear hatch creaked open. Inside, a woman lay curled on her side, duct tape across her mouth, wrists bound in zip ties. Her hands were mangled, fingers missing, blood dried around raw skin. Her eyes caught mine, wide, pleading, drowning in fear. I staggered backward, pulse hammering in my ears. My first thought was to run, but my body froze. The driver's door slammed. Out stepped a figure bigger than any man I'd ever seen. Filthy coat, boots caked with dirt, shoulders broad as a doorway. And his face, or what covered it, made my stomach turn. A mask stitched together from patches of pale skin, seams still slick with blood. It looked like something dragged straight from a nightmare. He reached me in 3 strides, his gloved hand clamping my collar. His voice growled deep and wet. "Where's my order?" I choked out a scream, struggling as he slammed my head against the metal frame of the drive-through window. Stars burst in my vision. I twisted, desperate, shoving my body through the service window. Somehow, I managed to slam the glass down on his arm. He bellowed, thrashing, the sound shaking through me like thunder. The glass held just long enough for me to stumble inside. My hands shook as I grabbed the phone and punched 911. My voice cracked. "Someone's here. He's got a woman in the car. Send police now." The operator's questions blurred. Where was I? Was the suspect armed? Was the victim alive? My eyes stayed locked on the front windows as the man pounded against them. Each blow rattled the frame. His voice roared through the glass. "She cheated on me. She's the monster, not me. I ducked behind the counter, clutching the receiver like a lifeline. The woman's eyes haunted me. The missing fingers, the hopeless way she lay in that trunk. My stomach churned with guilt. Why hadn't I run sooner? Why hadn't I called faster? Minutes dragged. The pounding grew weaker, replaced by guttural mutters. I risked a glance at the monitor. He stood there, mask glistening, rocking back and forth like an animal waiting for the cage to open. Sirens broke the silence. Red and blue lights bled across the asphalt. The man's head snapped toward the parking lot. For a second he froze, then slammed both fists into the glass one last time. Police swarmed, tasers drawn. The SUV's rear hatch still gaped open. 2 officers rushed the woman, cutting her bonds, lifting her gently out. She collapsed into their arms, barely conscious. Others tackled the man. He thrashed, bellowing curses, his mask half torn, patches peeling to reveal ruined flesh underneath. Even pinned, he ranted, words spilling like poison. "You don't know. She deserved it. She's the devil." I crouched in the corner, my whole body trembling. The operator's voice still echoed in my ear. "Sir, are you safe now?" Safe. The word felt hollow. The woman survived, though barely. At the hospital, detectives said she'd lost 3 fingers, beaten for trying to escape days earlier. She was his wife, married for 20 years, trapped in what neighbors thought was a normal life. They called him quiet, polite. I learned later he'd been on the run since Sunday, crossing state lines after setting fire to their home. His wife had been his hostage ever since. That night at the drive-thru was supposed to be his finale. Detectives asked me to recount everything. The order, the bloodbath joke, the mask, the trunk. I repeated it all until my throat was raw. One detective, a stocky man with gray at his temples, leaned back and muttered, "Sick bastard thought he was writing the ending to his own horror movie." I couldn't shake the sound of his voice, though. The way he'd said it, like he meant it. Caramel bloodbath. The words still rattled in my chest, each syllable sticky with malice. For days afterward, I couldn't sleep. Every time an engine rumbled outside my apartment, I jolted awake. Dark SUVs left me paralyzed. Even at work, the hum of the fluorescents seemed sinister, buzzing like the faint breathing I'd heard through the headset. My manager told me to take time off. "It's not your fault, Jordan," she said, but she didn't understand. I kept replaying it, thinking if I'd locked the doors earlier or never stepped outside, maybe I wouldn't have seen those handprints, those eyes. Maybe ignorance would have been mercy. But I had seen. And once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. By the end of the week, I knew I couldn't go back. I quit 7-Eleven that Friday. No notice, just left my badge and apron on the counter. The thought of standing under those buzzing lights, waiting for another car to idle at the window, was unbearable. Word spread fast. Albuquerque locals whispered about the bloodbath killer. Some avoided that 7-Eleven entirely. Within a year, it shut down. The neon sign came down, the lot empty, but people still swore that on October nights, if you stood near the drive-thru speaker, you'd hear faint whispers, phantom orders. For me, the aftermath wasn't supernatural, it was survival. I had nightmares for months. In them, I stood in that parking lot, and the SUV door creaked open again. The woman's eyes always found me. Sometimes she begged, sometimes she blamed, and always, the mask appeared behind her, stitched seams smiling wide. Therapy helped eventually. So did talking, even when it felt impossible. I learned that silence breeds monsters, that keeping fear hidden only lets it fester. Still, whenever I drive past a convenience store late at night, I can't help but glance at the lot. My chest tightens at the sight of any dark SUV, the memory clawing back like fresh blood on glass. What haunts me most isn't the mask, or even his words. It's how ordinary it felt until it didn't. One moment I was stocking shelves, the next I was staring at handprints of a woman fighting for her life. Horror doesn't announce itself. It just slips in, quiet, through a drive-thru speaker, when you least expect it. Evil doesn't always wear horns or announce itself with warning. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, in a marriage, in a stranger's car, in a town that thinks it's safe. But trust your instincts, speak up when something feels wrong, and never ignore the signs of suffering around you. Silence protects monsters. Awareness can save lives. Back in 2015, my world was small. I was 21, juggling classes at a community college in Denver and part-time shifts at a coffee shop that smelled permanently of burnt espresso. My cousin and I lived in different dorms but hung out often, finding excuses to wander the city. That night in March, we weren't looking for adventure, just candles. Dorm life had a way of making the air stale and sour, and we thought scented wax might help. The 7-Eleven on Colfax wasn't glamorous, but it had a surprisingly big seasonal aisle. Lavender, vanilla, cedarwood, rows of glass jars lined up like soldiers. We picked them up one by one, holding them to our noses, cracking jokes about which ones could cover up microwaved ramen or sweaty laundry. It was ordinary, harmless, but ordinary things have a way of twisting on you without warning. 2 women came down the aisle, about our age. They were dressed casual, nothing that stood out. One smiled easily and leaned toward my cousin. "Can I smell that one you're holding?" she asked. Harmless enough. Before my cousin could answer, the other girl reached across and shoved a completely different candle in our faces. "Here, try this instead," she said brightly. It startled me more than anything. I laughed awkwardly, taking half a step back. But they didn't laugh. Their smiles stayed fixed, their eyes sharper than their words. That was the first moment I felt something shift, the kind of shift you only recognize later. At first, it seemed like normal friendliness. People strike up conversations in stores all the time. We joked a little, shrugged, tried to stay polite. But then the questions started. "What's your name?" the girl with the candle asked. I hesitated, then gave just my first name. My cousin did the same. "Where do you live? Do you work around here?" The words tumbled out quickly, wrapped in cheerfulness but delivered with an edge. I gave vague answers. "North Side," I said. "Office job." Neither was true, but it felt safer that way. They didn't let up. "Which neighborhood exactly?" One pressed. "What kind of office?" Their smiles never faltered. My cousin shifted beside me, uneasy. I tried to laugh it off. "Just boring work. Nothing exciting." The girls leaned closer. "Do you hike? There are great trails. Let's go together." It wasn't really a question. It was a pitch. They circled back to it 3 times, even when we politely said no. Then their attention turned. "That's a nice necklace," one of them said, staring at my chest. "Where'd you get it? Do you have other jewelry?" I felt my shoulders stiffen. Compliments usually make you feel warm. These didn't. They felt like someone taking inventory. "Let's exchange numbers," the other said suddenly, her phone already out. I shook my head, trying to keep my tone light. "Sorry, I don't really give out my number," she pressed harder. "We could text, plan a hike, grab coffee, come on." The second refusal didn't stop them. They asked again and again, 4 times total. By the last one, my stomach had twisted into a knot. Something wasn't right. I tried to end the conversation gently. "We need to check out," I said, pulling my cousin toward the counter. My voice came out sharper than I intended. They didn't follow, but they didn't leave either. I glanced back once and saw them still standing in the candle aisle, not shopping, not moving, just watching. We paid quickly. The cashier didn't seem to notice our tension, or maybe he didn't care. We stepped outside, bags in hand, breathing the cool March air like it could wash away the unease. But it didn't. 5 minutes later, as we walked toward the car, I noticed them again. They were outside now, leaning casually near the entrance, chatting up a young couple who'd just walked in. Same smiles, same questions. I saw one of them pull out a phone, The couple laughed, nodding, probably giving out their number. My chest tightened. I pulled my cousin into the car. "Don't look," I muttered as I started the engine. My hands shook on the steering wheel, but I tried to play it cool. "Do you think they were just friendly?" my cousin asked as we pulled away. "Friendly doesn't push like that," I said. "Friendly doesn't ask 4 times for your number." The streetlights blurred as we drove home. The storm wasn't outside. It was in my gut, rolling and heavy. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation, the way their eyes moved, sharp and scanning like they weren't just chatting but evaluating. The mismatched candle shoved in my face, the quick jump to personal questions, the insistence on meeting again. None of it felt natural. It felt rehearsed. The next day I told a friend about it. She frowned and said, "Sounds like some kind of scam." But scams usually end with money. This felt different. It wasn't about selling something. It was about pulling us in. The hiking suggestion stuck with me the most. They'd mentioned it so many times like it was their anchor. I pictured agreeing, meeting them on a trail somewhere quiet, away from the city. My chest went tight at the thought. What if we'd said yes? I searched online, half embarrassed, half desperate. There were threads about similar encounters. Strangers overly friendly in public places, pressing for details, insisting on numbers, pushing for meetups. Some people called it trafficking tactics. Others called it urban legends. I didn't know what to believe. All I knew was my instincts had screamed at me, and I'd listened. Barely. But the thought that others might not, that the couple outside the store might have gone along, haunted me. Weeks passed, but the unease clung to me. Every time I drove down Colfax and past that 7-Eleven, my stomach knotted. I'd glance toward the entrance, half expecting to see them there, still smiling, still pressing. I started paying more attention in public. Who was lingering too close? Who was asking questions that went too far? My friends teased me for being jumpy, but I didn't care. That night taught me a truth I hadn't wanted to admit. Danger doesn't always announce itself with shouting or violence. Sometimes it comes dressed in friendliness, with a smile and a candle jar. I still buy candles now and then, but not from that store, and never without remembering the weight of that moment. The way my cousin's arm felt when I pulled her toward the register, the way my pulse pounded as we walked out the door. Sometimes the scariest thing isn't what happened, it's what almost happened. Trusting your instincts isn't paranoia, it's survival. Danger doesn't always look like danger. It can come with a smile, a compliment, or a harmless question. Learning when to step away, when to say no, and when to listen to that quiet alarm inside you can mean the difference between safety and regret. Better to risk seeming rude than to risk your life. I'd been working in IT long enough that the years blurred into one another. Same cubicle, same coffee runs, same endless resets of office passwords. By 2017, I was 32, and most of my free time was spent behind screens. It felt like my 20s had evaporated in fluorescent light. What I hadn't done in years was something I used to love: comic conventions. As a kid, those shows were the highlight of my summers. I'd save allowance money to buy cheap posters and maybe get a signature from some B-list actor who once played a hero on TV. My favorite had been a kids' action series, and the lead actor was everything I wanted to be back then: confident, strong, larger than life. I'd heard he was coming to Phoenix that August, and for the first time in nearly a decade, I bought myself a badge. The morning of the convention, the desert heat pressed down like punishment. The streets around the convention center pulsed with color. Cosplayers moved in groups, armor and capes gleaming, wigs catching sunlight. It felt like stepping into another world. Before heading in, I stopped at the 7-Eleven on 3rd Avenue for coffee. That's where I noticed him. A man, maybe mid-30s, wearing a trench coat despite the 100-degree heat. He paced near the freezers, muttering, carrying a duffel bag that sagged heavy against his leg. At first, I thought he might be another cosplayer, Maybe some edgy character I didn't recognize, but something was off. His eyes darted, landing on the security cameras more than the shelves. He bought a pack of gum, cash only, and left. The cashier gave me a look, like she'd noticed it too. We both shrugged. Strange people pass through all the time. I didn't think about him again, at least not until later, when everything unraveled. Inside the convention center, the air was electric. Thousands of people filled the halls, some in elaborate armor, others just there for merchant panels. I grabbed a seat in the main floor lobby, sipping my coffee and scrolling my phone. That's when the whispers started. Someone leaned against the wall nearby, showing his friend's screenshots on Twitter. "Look at this, dude. Some psychos posting threats." I didn't want to eavesdrop, but the words made my stomach clench. I asked, "What kind of threats?" He showed me. Posts from an anonymous account, all aimed at the guest actor, the one I'd come to see. "Fake heroes deserve to be cleansed," one read. Another said, "Justice is coming to Phoenix." The last one made my skin crawl. I'm already inside. Security guards hurried past, radios crackling. Word spread fast. People scrolled their feeds nervously, speculating. Some brushed it off as another troll fishing for attention, but the tone of those messages was different, colder, deliberate. I remembered the man from the 7-Eleven, the trench coat, the muttering, the way he'd stared at the cameras. The thought nagged at me, but I told myself it couldn't be the same person. Phoenix was a big city. Lots of weirdos came to cons. Still, I caught myself scanning the crowd. Every duffel bag looked suspicious. Every cosplayer with a covered face made my chest tighten. I shook it off, told myself not to ruin the day with paranoia. I wanted to meet my childhood hero, not spiral into conspiracy. But then I overheard a girl near the vendor tables whispering to her friend, "I used to know him, online. He's dangerous." Her voice was tight with fear, and I realized this wasn't paranoia anymore. Something was happening, and I was standing in the middle of it. The girl wasn't much older than me, dressed in a simple costume, nothing flashy. She looked pale as she talked to a security officer, hands shaking while she showed him her phone. I drifted close enough to catch bits of her story. She'd met the guy online months back through a fitness forum that had turned into late-night chats. At first he seemed normal, even friendly. But then his messages shifted. Obsessions with purity, anger about fake men in Hollywood, rambling about cleansing the culture. When she blocked him, he created new accounts, sending threats. She showed screenshots, the same username posting the convention threats that morning. I felt my stomach drop. I pictured the trench coat again, the duffel bag. I almost said something, but fear kept my mouth shut. What if I was wrong? What if I was just projecting my nerves onto some unlucky cosplayer? Minutes later, police entered in groups, plainclothes officers weaving through the crowd. Announcements played overhead, subtle but firm. For your safety, please report suspicious activity to staff. People laughed it off nervously, assuming it was just extra security for the celebrity guest. I couldn't laugh. My coffee sat untouched, my hands slick with sweat. Every time I thought about the man buying gum, I saw him reaching into that bag instead. My heart hammered at the idea that maybe he'd been standing in the same 7-Eleven as me hours before, already planning. Then came the shout from the balcony above, an officer's voice sharp and commanding. "Drop the bag!" Heads turned, gasps rippling through the floor. I craned my neck, and there he was, the trench coat, the duffel bag. My skin went cold. From where I stood on the floor, I could see the second-floor balcony. The man gripped the railing, his duffel bag resting heavy at his side. His face was twisted, sweat pouring down his temples, lips moving like he was reciting something only he could hear. "Drop it!" another officer barked. He didn't. He reached instead, slow, deliberate. My chest tightened as the flap of the bag opened. Inside, even from a distance, I caught the gleam of metal. A shotgun, knives, what looked like pepper spray, throwing stars that caught the light. My pulse roared in my ears. The officers surged, tackling him before he could lift a single weapon. The crowd screamed, scattering in all directions, some dropping props and backpacks as they ran. I just stood frozen, hands trembling, watching chaos unravel like a scene from the shows I'd once loved. Only this wasn't scripted. The man screamed as they cuffed him, words spilling out in wild bursts. "He's not a hero. None of them are. You're all blind." His voice cracked, raw with fury, but his body sagged like he knew it was over. I wanted to breathe relief, but the thought of what could have happened sank like lead in my chest. If the girl hadn't spoken up, if the police hadn't acted fast, if he'd reached that bag just seconds earlier, hundreds of us could have been slaughtered. The crowd slowly returned, whispering, filming with phones, nerves rattled but alive. The actor who had drawn us all there never appeared. His panel was canceled, and rightfully so. The buzz of joy that had filled the convention center that morning had been replaced with something heavier: fear and silence. The next day, the story was everywhere. Local news plastered his mugshot across the screen. 34 years old, unemployed, living with relatives. A history of online threats no one had taken seriously until then. The articles listed the weapons, each one making me sick to imagine in that crowded hall. The convention scrambled to respond. Overnight, they banned all prop weapons. No fake guns, no swords, not even staffs or wands. Vendors complained, cosplayers protested, but most of us understood. We'd stood too close to tragedy to argue about foam swords. For weeks, I couldn't stop replaying the morning. The way he'd stared at the cameras in 7-Eleven, the pack of gum, the duffel bag dragging low. I'd been 5 feet from him, coffee in hand, thinking he was just another strange face in the crowd. That store on 3rd Avenue became something else for me. Every time I passed it after work, my chest tightened. I'd look at the glowing sign and think about how close death had stood to me, buying gum like anybody else. I still love conventions, but I haven't gone back. Not yet. Maybe someday. For now, the memory is enough. It's not the cosplay or the actors I remember most. It's the silence of the crowd when those words echoed. Drop the bag. That silence has never really left me. We spend so much time imagining danger as something distant, something that happens to other people in other places. Evil often stands right next to us, blending in, waiting. Trust your instincts. Speak up when something feels wrong. Silence can cost lives, but one voice like that girl's can change everything.